you're just kind of walking by, here in a minute we're going to be talking about 10 different plants you can grow here in Oklahoma right now, and making a case for why you should grow each of them. So each one of the plants we talk about, we're going to be giving away as soon as we're done talking about it. So if you want to win one of the plants, grab a ticket from Terry's one around here. She'll be making her way around. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, welcome everybody. My name is Del Spoonmore. My wife Carrie is right over here. We started gardening back in 2015, and afterwards we created the From Seed to Spoon gardening app to make it easy for other people to get started with growing food. So you can download it from the App Store and follow along if you'd like to follow along with any of the plants that we're talking about today. You can just search for From Seed to Spoon in the App Store and find it that way. Today we're going to be talking about 10 different foods you can grow in Oklahoma. And we're probably really anywhere at this point for most of these, and making a case for why you should grow some of them. So I don't want to get started too early because then everyone over here is going to lose their shot at winning the plant. So let's go ahead and start. I'll talk longer about one of these up front. So let's start with one that maybe a lot of people do not typically grow. Let me go with sage first. So who here has grown sage before? Anyone? Awesome. We got a couple people. The first couple years we grew sage, I did not really understand why we were growing it. We weren't using it a lot in the kitchen. We were using it just for pretty much for dressing for turkey. It was like how we thought about sage. And it wasn't until we started making pesto from sage that I really became a huge fan of it. So that is my number one recommendation for sage, is use it as a pesto. We'll talk a lot about pesto today because some of the other things you can make pesto from. But the recipe is pretty simple. You just take a handful of these leaves, and then you mix it with pine nuts and olive oil and Parmesan cheese and some garlic inside of a little like ninja blender type thing. Yeah. And then you mix all that together, it makes pesto. It's amazing. So sage is really easy to grow. The one challenge with sage is it does not like to be in water all the time. So that's why we really recommend growing them in these smart pots. We grow pretty much everything in these smart pots because you can handle moisture issues really well in them. You're not going to flood them. They're also super portable. And when the roots hit the side of the smart pot, they don't circle around like they do in containers. They form tiny little capillaries that continue to suck in oxygen and things like that. So we're a big fan of these smart pots. We use these pretty much exclusively. We sell these through our app as well. So, but we're not paid by them or anything like that. I just really believe in them. We've tried raised beds. We've tried all the different methods, and we've had the most success with these. So with sage, you can grow it in something as small as like a 5-gallon smart pot. These are all 5-gallon smart pots. The bigger they get, you might want to upgrade it into like a 15-gallon or something like that. They will come back year after year. So sage will last a long time into the winter. It'll go dormant for just a few months in the winter, and then it'll come back in the spring, and it'll put out a ton of leaves. It also produces flowers around June that if you're having anxiety, just go sniff those flowers because it calms you down instantly. I have 4 kids, and I've done this a lot where if my kids are stressing me out, I'll go hang out with my sage plant for a little bit. So I'm a big fan of sage. I definitely recommend growing it if you. It's one of those herbs where it can be very overwhelming with flavor, so don't use too much of it. We'll cover some other herbs here in a little bit that are a little more mild, but sage is one of those that is very strong. Oh, we have a question. Yes, go ahead. Sage for mosquitoes? I've heard that. We've tried like all the different plants for mosquitoes and things like that. We found that no matter, I've had like 20 citronella plants surrounding me, and I still mosquitoes landing on them. So I tend to go more towards some of the like oils that are made, or like creams that are made with those oils. I think that helps more. But honestly, I've tried like planting the plants around. I've never found that it keeps them off of me. Maybe other people have had better experiences, but I've tried all of that. But sage is a great companion plant for your other plants. Kind of in the same way that they think it helps with mosquitoes, because it can confuse the pests because it puts scents up into the air. So if you have a tomato plant and it's surrounded by sage and oregano and basil and some of these other herbs we're going to talk about, then it makes it hard for the pests to find that tomato plant because it's camouflaged by the scent of these other strong herbs. So a lot of these herbs we talk about are going to be great to have in your garden to go around other plants as well. So let's give away the sage plant. Let's have our first giveaway. Does everybody have a ticket that wants the sage? Does anybody really want the sage that doesn't have a ticket? I don't want you to miss that. Over here, we've got someone, she really wants the sage plant. We've got to get her involved. Okay. All right, so Carrie, you want to throw that in there and shake it up and have our first winner here? I'll start talking about the, need a minute? We talked about smart pumps. Yep. We did not talk about the soil mix that goes into these though. For these today, we got some bag soil mix that we put in there, it's potting mix. You can make this yourself and save a lot of money. We have a YouTube video we put out a few weeks ago, last week, where Carrie made it, and really the kids did all the work. So you can see how it's easy enough for kids to make. And you just mix a couple ingredients together. So, but it's important to have that mix because this mix has like these little white flakes or vermiculite that helps regulate moisture. There's also some coconut cores and peat moss in here mixed with compost. But again, you can make it yourself, save a lot of money. So that's what we do in our garden. We have videos on that. We have a YouTube channel where we have videos going out almost every day from our garden showing how we're growing food here in Oklahoma. So we can get videos directly from the app. And we're ready for a winner now. So the last three numbers are 470. We have a sage winner. 470. Oh, we got a winner. Awesome. These have not been watered because I didn't want to create a mess in y'all's car. But as soon as you get home, water them really well. So, all right. So the next plant we're going to talk about. Let's talk about tomatoes because this is a really popular plant. A lot of people like to grow tomatoes. Let's talk about like one thing that confuses people on tomatoes a lot, which is when you go to the nursery, you see determinate and indeterminate, right? It's really simple. Determinate means it grows to a determinate length. Determinate means bush tomato. They get like 3 feet tall, 4 feet tall sometimes, put out a lot of tomatoes, and then might put out one more round of tomatoes, and then they're done. Indeterminate tomatoes, on the other hand, make this long vine that can get like 20 feet long if you let it continue to grow. And it gives you tomatoes throughout the whole season. Not as many at once, but throughout the whole season. So there's two types of tomatoes. I like to grow the determinate tomatoes because I'm a lazy gardener and I can't keep up with trellising a tomato that's continuing to grow. And I really like these bush tomatoes because they get, this one is a smaller variety that probably gets about 3 feet tall and then puts out a lot of tomatoes at once. So that's my favorite way to grow tomatoes is in containers. A lot of ours are in like 15 to 20 gallon versions of these because it gives you a little more leniency with water. Another cool thing about these is in the summer, if you're going to go on vacation for a week or if you're going to be out of town for a weekend or something like that, you can put these in a kiddie pool and put them with a little bit of water in the bottom, and that'll help them out with keeping them, being able to drink some water over the weekend. You want to be careful because you don't want to do that too much and root log them. There's a balance there. But we've done that hack on the weekends. If we want to spend all weekend at the lake and it's going to be 90 degrees, then we'll throw our tomatoes in the pool and then we'll go to the lake. So now the kiddie pools will drill a hole like 2 inches up. So if it rains a lot, then it doesn't flood them out too much. You don't want them to sit in water too long. Another question we get a lot about tomatoes is pruning. We do not prune our determinate tomatoes because we want them to produce as many tomatoes as possible. And the vining tomatoes, you can prune, but really our strategy on that is just to grow on a cattle panel trellis. So we'll get a cattle panel. They used to be $17. Now they're like $25. But you can get them at Tractor Supply. You just arch them over, and then the tomatoes grow over that cattle panel. It's really cool. You can grow beans on one side. You can have plants underneath of it that like the shade in the summer. We've got a lot of videos showing how we do that as well. Tomatoes are one of the plants that is going to be most susceptible to diseases and to things like that. It's one of the harder things to grow. I do recommend starting with a cherry tomato or a smaller tomato because those are going to be easier. And then a couple tips with tomatoes are to make sure that you mulch the soil. So whoever wins this tomato, when you get it home, put some wood chips or something like that on top of it so the soil doesn't come up and get the leaves. Because most of the viruses and bacteria that make the plant sick are in the soil. And when it rains hard or if you water really hard, the soil bounces up, gets on the leaves, and then now you got a sick plant. So you can avoid that by mulching really well. What other common questions do we get about tomatoes?
Common pests for tomatoes, the tomato hornworm. Yes, those are fun for the kids to play with. That's what. One way way that we really go about helping with the tomato hornworm is by using companion planting. So we do a lot of plants such as like marigolds around it, or even something like basil. Basil really helps to improve the flavor of it also, of the tomatoes. So basil will help in a lot of different ways. So we love basil. But yeah, basil is really good, marigolds, nasturtiums, things like that. So we try to do a lot of companion planting to help repel that tomato hornworm.
One of the biggest problems you'll face too with tomatoes is blossom end rot. This happens when the end of the tomato gets gross, just gets all mushy, and then eventually the whole tomato gets gross. It's usually caused by inconsistency with watering. So it can happen naturally if you get a bunch of rain for a few weeks. There's really nothing you can do. The smart pots help with it because it regulates moisture, along with the soil mix with the vermiculite. But make sure that once your tomatoes are established, you're not watering them too much. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make, is they water the plants too much. So for the first week until they're established, you need to water them every day, help them get established. But at that point, start to back down. And once they're fully established, the way that we water is we will flood everything, basically. We'll flood the whole garden, like water a lot. And then we will not water again until I can put my finger in the soil and it's dry all the way down to my second knuckle, right there. So that's a really simple way to be able to know when to water, when you need to water again. Sometimes that's once a week, sometimes that's every day in the summer. So it just depends on a lot of different things as how often you need to water. But one of the biggest mistakes people make is overwatering. So let's give away this tomato. Mary, Mary, you got our tickets. Bring our tickets over.
Take the tickets.
We got some more.
Oh, different Mary.
That Mary has them. I thought you meant that Mary. There's two Marys involved. It is that Mary. What a riddle. And now she's dropped it. Oh, man. We're trying our best to give away this tomato, y'all. Just one moment. Does anyone have any questions about tomatoes before we give it away? We cover all the stuff you need to know?
Okay.
Okay, cool. All right, we got a winner.
Okay, let's go.
486. 486. Got a winner. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. Next, let's talk about chives next. So these are chives. The biggest thing that we did not understand when we first started growing food is, why do we need these if we have onions? Like, why are there both? Let me explain that. These are really good at producing a bunch of green tops. That's what, and they're also perennial. So they'll come back year after year. They will take over this whole pot. You will have chives forever from this one here. They are awesome for the tops, but they don't produce bulbs. Whereas onions produce bulbs, and if you cut the tops off, then it limits the bulb development. Also, the tops of onions don't taste as good as the tops of chives. So that's why you need both. We love having both. Chives are our favorite, though. Chives go into pretty much every meal. We're putting them on everything. There's also different types of chives. These are onion chives. There's garlic chives as well. If you're ever not sure, one little tip on that is onion chives are circle and garlic chives are flat. So if you ever have something in your garden, you're not sure which it is. The garlic is flat, the onions are circle. So they're really easy to grow.
So one of my favorite things about chives is it has a really, really beautiful purple flower towards the end of the season, and those are actually edible also. They're kind of a stronger version of this, but it's still really good. The kids love eating them. The kids love eating them too. I love eating them. They're great, and it's really pretty. It brings in a lot of beneficials.
They're very easy to grow too. Like, this is probably in the top 3 plants as far as ease to grow. So they don't need a lot of room. They will take over a garden too. So it's one of those things where we like to have them in a container. They're not as aggressive as something like mint, but they will take over quite a bit. All right. So do we have any questions about chives? We don't talk as long about chives. It's tomatoes. It's an easier one.
They're good plants to put with your other plants. that will help protect them and repel pests and all of that. So this is a really good one to put by all of your vegetables and things like that.
What we do a lot of times with our onions and our chives is we'll create a border. So if we have a raised bed, like a 4x8 raised bed, we'll have a border around the whole perimeter on the inside of onions or chives. And then we'll have like peppers or tomatoes or cabbage or something on the inside, so that it's almost like a barrier to hide those plants from the pests. So these are all the things we do to make it where we don't have to use chemicals or pesticides in our garden. So it's a mix of using companion planting and attracting beneficial bugs like ladybugs, and spiders are super helpful in our garden. All these things that take care of the other bugs. Also, don't plant all of your tomatoes in one place. Spread them around your garden, so that if a pest does come in, maybe it only finds that one plant. It doesn't find your whole crop of tomatoes right there. So these are some of the biggest things that we do to prevent. We've never had to use any pesticide in our garden. Squash bugs are the only thing that we've struggled with, that we haven't been able to handle, but those are pretty difficult. Let's talk about squash bugs next, I guess. We've got a zucchini plant over here.
So, yeah. And while we're talking about chives really quick, if you guys are ever confused about what plants go really well together, our app makes it easy. So if you go into chives, there's a friends tab and it'll tell you what plants to plant it next to that it'll help. And same with like any other plant that you go into, it'll help guide you as to what to plant together. So I just wanted to mention that. And then 508 is the winner for these chives. Woo! Yay!
Our app is called From Seed to Spoon. You can find it in the App Store, From Seed to Spoon. Yep. You're welcome. We have a website and our app, and then you can find all that just From Seed to Spoon. All right. Now we'll talk about squash. Okay. All right. So squash is something I think everybody should try growing, because you're going to get a ton of production from it until you start your battle with the squash bugs. So your first year of gardening is going to be epic with squash, because the squash bugs don't know you're there yet. So you get all of the squash and you're thinking like, why doesn't everybody just grow squash all the time? Like, why aren't we all squash farmers? This is so easy. And then the next year it's a war. And we have tactics that we've implemented. They involve fire, and they involve trapping squash bugs and throwing them. Basically like what we got to do is we plant squash as a trap. So we have another variety of squash called blue leopard squash we plant as a trap crop. And then once all the squash bugs come to that plant, we throw that plant in the fire. And hopefully we've covered all the squash bugs. And then we plant our real squash after that. So second year do that. First year enjoy your success with squash, because you're going to get a lot from it. One tip with squash, though, to help with the squash bugs, aside from all the other stuff, is grow it vertically. So don't just let it grow out over the ground, because the squash bugs, it's really easy for them to hide and to get under the leaves and lay their eggs and do all that kind of stuff. If you grow it vertically and you have like what we do is we have a T-post next to the squash. So I'll have a T-post in the ground right here. And then as this squash plant, and it's going to get big. And as it grows and gets big, I just continue to tie it to that T-post so it's up off the ground. And now the squash bugs are going to be less likely to choose that squash, because they're at risk of that one. There's bugs, there's birds, and there's other bugs that are getting at them and things like that, including us and our children. We pay our children a quarter for every squash bug they get. So, but squash is also one of the things we use the most in the kitchen. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I have a lot of different recipes on our website and our app, all about zucchini, because yes, that first year that we had zucchini, we had mountains of zucchini in our kitchen, and we had a lot of fun trying to come up with what to plant or what to grow, what to eat. Wow, can't even talk. So we came up with a lot of unique recipes. My favorites include things like zucchini grilled cheese. That's really, really good. So I just shred the zucchini, and then you put a little bit of flour in it to help it stick together, an egg, and then you put cheese in the middle of it and make it just like a grilled cheese sandwich. Super tasty. And so we do that. We make a lot of like zucchini pizza bites. Super easy. Just chop it up, and you put a little bit of pizza sauce and some cheese on top. put it in the oven. Good to go. The kids love it. I'm probably making them hungry. There's a lot of different things that you can do. I have a lot of different recipes on. If you go to our app under zucchini, and there's a section for recipes on there too. So there's a whole bunch of them there. So check them out.
Brownies too,
Yes.
and cookies.
And cookies.
Yeah, my favorite.
And bread, of course.
Zucchini bread, yeah. You can do a lot of stuff with zucchini. You make milk from zucchini. We've done that before. Because like sometimes with zucchini, you get these giant baseball bat zucchinis. I don't know how it happens, but you'll have a 2-foot, 3-foot zucchini hiding under the plant. And then you can't really eat them. Like they don't taste great, but you can make a milk from them. You just basically run them through the food processor, and then you can use that milk to make bread. So we're not drinking that milk, but it is a good replacement for bread. Things like that. So, all right, let's give away this zucchini plant.
Thank
Our
you.
winner is 513. One off.
Just over here.
513. Okay, let's get another one. 492. All right.
Okay, call my number next. I hope she did it, right? I hope I don't kill it. It's my first year. Thank you.
Okay. Next, let's talk about basil. So, we've talked about pesto quite a bit already. We talked about the sage earlier. Basil is really what pesto is known for. So, and this variety in particular is known for producing a lot of really good leaves that work well with basil. So they work well with pesto. So basil is the number one thing that we're planting next to our tomatoes for a couple of reasons. Number one is the whole companion plant, scent in the air thing I talked about earlier, where it confuses the pests. But also there's a lot of studies that have been done on basil and tomatoes together. And basil actually improves the flavor of tomatoes that are grown near it. Like they've grown together for thousands of years, and they've grown accustomed to being next to each other, and they help each other out. So a lot of times what we'll do with our basil is we will have a really big smart pot, or maybe we just planted a fire ring. You know, those fire rings you can buy, we filled that with soil, put a tomato in the middle, and then surrounded it with basil. We're making a lot of pesto from basil. We're also preserving basil quite a bit. The easiest way that we have found to preserve basil for the winter is to do so in an oil. And the easiest way to do that is in the silicone ice cube trays. So we get the silicone ice cube trays, we chop up basil really small, put them, fill the trays, and then fill those trays with olive oil, and then freeze them. And then what you can do is take that little block of oil that's frozen with basil out of the freezer, throw it in a saucepan, put it on medium heat, and then it all melts, and then now you've got your base for a sauce. And that's our favorite way to preserve basil. Some of these other herbs we preserve through dehydration, like sage, that's how we preserve it. Rosemary, oregano, all of those we dehydrate and then preserve them that way. Basil doesn't do that well with dehydration though. It's also the herb that likes the most amount of sun. So a lot of the herbs do well with shade and they can handle it, but basil likes a lot of sun and a lot of heat. It's also the herb that it's last to plant for us. So oregano and rosemary and some of these others, we can plant as early as March and April in Oklahoma. But basil, you've got to wait until nighttime temperatures are in the 50s. Basically, you've got to wait until you plant your peppers and your tomatoes. Otherwise, they're just not going to do well. So they're also the first ones to die off in the winter. You can also grow basil indoors. A lot of people grow it as a microgreen under grow lights. That's something you can do with basil.
Basil is one of the herbs that's actually pretty easy to grow from seed, whereas a lot of these other herbs we're talking about today can be difficult to start from seed and are better to propagate from or by starter plants. But basil is one that if you start by seed, you can actually do it pretty easily.
And I have to give a shout out too to Bill Ferris at Prairie Wind Nursery. He'll be out at the Flower Fest next weekend, May 7th. That's next weekend, right? I did, May 7th, I know, is the Flower Festival. He's going to be out there, and he has like a legit 14 types of basil. He specializes in herbs, and he has a lot of different types. And that's one of the fun things about basil a lot of these are that way, but basil is probably the most. Is that there's a ton of variety out there in flavors. So there's a lemon basil, a lime basil. This is a pesto basil that makes a bunch of pesto. There's
You're forgetting my favorite basil. So Thai basil. It tastes like a cinnamon. It is so good. The kids love it because it's almost sweet. And I add it to sweet potatoes and carrots, and I roast all that together. It is so good. It's very sweet.
there's also a variety called lettuce leaf basil, where if you're looking to add it to like a sandwich, it's more of a mild flavor, and the leaves are big and it's perfect size. So especially for like a chicken sandwich with a little marinara and like some mozzarella, and like you add that little basil leaf on there, it takes it another level. It's really good. So, all right. Any questions about basil before we give it away? I want Italian food now. We talked about all these herbs. $4.64. Oh, we got a winner. Get that? There you go. Just hug it. All right. All right. We got 5 plants left to talk about. What are we talking about next? What's in front of us? Let's do oregano. Okay. So you're going to see a pattern now. Oregano is, again, in the same pattern of companion plants. This is a great one. Oregano, if you look up, if you go Google right now, like best herbs for health, oregano is going to be in pretty much every article that you read. It has a lot of properties that help with heart health, with pretty much any health condition you look up. Oregano has been found to help with it. So that's the number one reason we're growing oregano, is for the health benefits. But it also has a really good taste. The Italian oregano is the mildest of the flavors, and it's way different than the oregano that you may be used to from the stuff you get from the store that's in the bottle. It's going to have, fresh oregano has way more of a flavor than anything from a bottle. I mean, that's really going to apply to all these herbs, but oregano is going to be one of the big ones. Same with the health benefits. You're going to lose all those health benefits once you start, go through the whole dehydration process and the preservation and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely recommend, if you've never grown anything before and you're looking for something to start out with, go look at your Italian seasoning in the cupboard and then just replace each one of those herbs and just grow those. It's going to be oregano and parsley and rosemary and basil and all these, right? Start with those. They're very easy to grow. That's kind of part of why we're showing them today, because they're very easy to grow. They're very beginner-friendly plants. Oregano is going to grow like a weed. It'll take over its whole area. We typically have it in an area where I don't mind if it's going to spread out. So it's going to do really well in Oklahoma typically. The biggest thing is just don't overwater it. We use it as a companion for pretty much everything, especially things like broccoli. It does really well with. It can help with squash bugs as well. So let's give away some oregano. $4.95. $4.95. Gotta get another one. $5.02. We got a winner. All right. Mary, you want to take this to her? Just got it right over here. You got it? All right. Okay, next let's talk about peppers. So peppers are one of those things that I highly recommend you grow if you like peppers. If you don't like peppers, obviously don't do that. But if you like peppers, you're going to get a lot of peppers from it. It's one of the most prolific plants you can grow. It's kind of like squash in that way, probably more than squash, and it's easier to grow than squash because a lot of pests don't really like it. There's very few pests that you deal with peppers. I really can't think of anything that we've really struggled with peppers over the years. There's always, maybe cutworms when they first start. That's pretty much it. But peppers are really easy to grow. The thing is, you just don't want to plant them too early, because if pepper plants get stunted by the cold, a lot of times they never recover, and you end up not getting very many peppers. So one of the big things with peppers that we do is we will stage our rollout, is what I was going to say. But We'll start planting mid-April with kind of we're gambling on those peppers. We're holding back other peppers, and then every week I'm planting out new peppers, knowing that there's a good chance I lost some of those early peppers aren't going to make it, but I'm gambling just in case because it's worth it to get peppers early. So we also grow a lot of varieties of peppers. We probably have 40 or 50 different peppers in our garden right now. There's a lot of different varieties out there. They're really easy to grow. I highly recommend growing them, especially in these smart pots. Every pepper we have is in a smart pot because the biggest thing about these is in April. If we get enough of an alert on the cold front coming through, we can get all these inside. Now, when we have 40 or 50, it gets too hard. But, early in the spring, we've only planted 10 probably or so that first week. So that's enough to handle. We can get those inside if we get a cold front. That's what's really nice about these. For tomatoes and peppers and things like that are sensitive to cold, you can move them indoors if you need to.
We've also cut off the bottom to those 5-gallon water jugs and just kind of place it over top of this. So if you do have really cold weather coming in or a hailstorm or something like that, you can always just put it right over top of your plant.
You may ask, why did y'all plant 40 or 50 peppers? We like to have a lot of peppers for preservation over the winter because we eat a lot of peppers. Pretty much every meal we have starts with a base of onions and garlic and peppers, and then we add other stuff into it. So over the winter, when we can't have peppers, what we've done is we grow a lot of peppers, and then we have a few weeks in the fall where we just preserve peppers nonstop. And the easiest way we have found to preserve them is to run them through the Ninja, to chop them all up. We don't remove seeds or anything. We don't mind having the seeds in there.
Stems.
Yeah. And then we put those on a cookie tray and with some parchment paper, and then get it down flat and put that in the freezer. And then once that's been in the freezer for usually 24 hours, pull that out and then put that in a baggie. And then that keeps it all from freezing together in the baggie. And you've got, usually what we'll do is we'll take out, get a cup full, dump that in the pan when we start cooking, and then now we've got our peppers. So that's why we cook so many, because we like to have a lot. We like to have a lot of different variety too.
Yeah, we have several different types, and if you're looking in the app, we have them listed all separately. Not all of them. We have many different types. So we have different banana peppers, sweet peppers, bell peppers, and then hot peppers.
Yep.
So this one right here is
Jalapeno.
You'll probably need to trellis this. Well, when I say trellis, just get a small tomato cage to put around it once it gets bigger. It's not going to need it for a few months, but once it starts getting bigger, it'll help it out. Just have a little cage around it. You can also do a little bamboo stake into it and kind of tie it to it. Yeah, so let's give away a pepper plant. So 500. Oh, we got a winner. Awesome. All right, we got 3 more plants left to talk about. So next is marjoram. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on we have 2 together here. Forgot about that part. So this is marjoram and thyme, and the reason why we put these 2 together is because these are, I would say, definitely the mildest herbs, and the less likely that you're going to mess up in the kitchen. The reason why I say that is because one time when we first started growing, I put way too much rosemary in a meatloaf, and then she avoided meatloaf like a year. So you're not going to do that with marjoram or thyme. They're very mild flavor. Marjoram is kind of like oregano, but a more mild flavor, and then thyme is basically like salt for us. We're putting it on everything. Thyme is also, both of these are very easy to grow. Thyme is typically grown as a ground cover too. So you can grow it almost as an ornamental in a garden where if you want to have something that's it doesn't get real big. It stays on the ground, kind of sprawls out. And then marjoram gets a little bit bigger too. It gets a little taller. So these grow really well together. A lot of times too, what you can do is to have a mix of different herbs in the pot. So this one's a little small to have more than 2, but like a 10-gallon, you can put 3 in there and have a little herb garden right outside your kitchen. That's what we do a lot of times, where a lot of these herbs will have maybe more out in our garden where we're doing our mass production side of it for preservation, but then I've got several just right outside the kitchen. So it's really easy to get to them if I just need something.
And smart pots have these nice round raised beds, which are not quite as tall as these, and they're a lot wider, so you can plant a whole bunch of things all in one area.
All right, we got one growing already for this one. Four, 7, 8. All right, next.
Oh, no, we have it.
Oh, we do have 4, 7. There you go. Congratulations. Okay, 2 left. I'm gonna leave rosemary for last. All right, next is parsley. Parsley is very easy to grow. It's different than a lot of these other herbs because it's not a perennial. Basil isn't either. The other ones I mentioned are all perennial. They'll come back year after year. Parsley is a 2-year plant, so it'll last 2 years and then it'll go to seed. There's 2 different types of parsley we grow: Italian parsley and then curled parsley. The curled parsley does better in the winter, so typically that's the one that survives. Sometimes this one will too. It just depends on the winter. How do we use parsley most? Mostly in soups and things like that. I don't like the flavor as much as I do a lot of the other herbs.
Yeah.
Oh, couscous.
Yes.
Yes. There's a couscous at Cool Greens that I am obsessed with, and Carrie figured out the recipe, and it has some parsley in this. And that's the number one thing we're using it for, outside of getting it into soups and stuff. Parsley is one of the herbs with the most amount of health benefits. So that's the main reason why we're growing it. And then we're adding it into a lot of soups, and we do a lot of our own kitchen stock. From like, we'll make a whole chicken and then make our own chicken stock from that. There's a lot of parsley going in that as well. So we have a number for parsley. Any questions about parsley before we give it away? All right. Four, 7, 3. Got a winner right here. Awesome. There you go. Oh, I believe you. All right, and last but certainly not least is rosemary. Rosemary is probably my favorite herb to grow. I really like the flavor of it. We use it a lot on steaks and on meats and things like that. My favorite hack, if you will, for rosemary is to take an older stem, like this one will be good, take all the leaves off of it, and then use it as a skewer for shish kebabs. That's probably my favorite way to use rosemary. But it's one of my, I like the smell of it. It's very easy to grow. You're going to lose about half your rosemary every winter. It's just how it is here in Oklahoma. They don't respond well to the temperatures going from 70 to 10. They just don't handle that very well. I don't either, but they really don't. So this variety is art, and it's one of the rosemary varieties that does the best here in Oklahoma. Again, shout out to Bill Ferris at Prairie Wind Nursery. He's done a lot of trials for OSU on rosemary, and ours is the variety he's found to be the best at handling our winters. So this rosemary plant is probably a couple years old. It takes a little bit to get going, but you can do you can cut off of here to make new plants. That's the thing you can do on a lot of these herbs, actually. What else do we want to talk about with rosemary? It's a great companion plant too to have around the garden. We plant pretty much all of ours in these containers. That way I can move them in the winter if we get those brief cold snaps, especially some of the varieties that are more sensitive. All right, let's give away.
It's pest resistant and chicken resistant too. You guys have chickens?
Yes. It's one of the few things we can plant outside of our garden that our chickens will not destroy. Is rosemary and lavender. So if you have chickens. 514. Awesome, we got a winner. There you go. Thank you. All right, well, those are the 10 plants that we came to talk about today. Hopefully y'all got a lot out of this. Hopefully, yeah, thank you. If you haven't checked out our app, thanks. If you haven't checked out our app, again, it's From Seed to Spoon. You can just, if you search for From Seed to Spoon anywhere on the internet, you'll find us. So, thanks again for coming out. Have a good day, y'all.
Excuse me, can you tell me what your app is?
Yeah,
Okay. Thank you.
remember seed is food.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right.
So awesome. I know they're on Instagram. Table real quick. Sorry.